Hello everybody, not all that long ago, Detective Inspector JayEmm here concluded that the Ferrari FF was the best all-round, daily drivable sort of supercar that can carry 4 people for under £100,000. And if you were to choose anything else, you were certifiably mad. However, in light of new evidence, we are reopening the case. This is going to be interesting. So then, before we talk about what's new, what's old? What is it that made me fall in love with the FF quite so completely? The thing is, the FF really took me by surprise. I had previously driven this car's successor, the GTC4 Lusso, and though it was a very pretty, well-made and rather capable thing, I didn't exactly fall in love with it. It didn't have that tactility and interactivity that I want from a Ferrari. So when my buddy James said that he was considering a new car and wanted something a little bit more usable, and he was thinking about an FF, I said to him, honestly, I don't really think you're going to like it that much. He was the sort of person I thought would be much more interested in, say, a 599 with its more raw analog thrills. However, when we went to Dick Lovett Swindon and test drove an FF, both of us were absolutely blown away, because not only was it better than I expected, it turned out to be one of the best Ferraris I've ever driven. Highlights? Well, where do you begin? The massive 6.3 litre direct injected V12 naturally aspirated engine producing 660 horsepower, steering that was far more exciting and interactive than you'd really expect from a car in this class, a soundtrack to match, a beautifully constructed interior with some gorgeous materials and enough space for 4 real adults, and even a surprising amount of room in the boot too. Sure, something like an Audi RS6 or a Porsche Panamera Turbo was going to be a somewhat more sensible and practical alternative, but if you didn't need that amount of room in the back, this was going to deliver a more exciting drive more of the time. Okay, sure, not a perfect car, it's going to be a lot more expensive to run in terms of both fuel bills and also maintenance, but I think for the sort of person that can cope with that, it was a car worth buying. I even think that this is actually a damn good looking car too. Sure, the F12 is prettier, but I think this is a touch more elegant than the later Lusso, and overall, considering what it is and how big it is, it's a very striking car. So then, almost a clean sweep for the FF, a car excellent in nearly every area that counted. What then could possibly go wrong to have made me say, I need to reconsider my conclusion? Well, it turns out just about everything. Not that long after I'd finished filming the video with James's car, it began to act up. Initially, it just had trouble idling smoothly, and then later, and slightly more worryingly, it would actually accelerate without your foot on the pedal. Not by much, but certainly enough to get your attention. That was traced to a faulty throttle pedal switch, and on account of that being a common failure in many modern cars, we didn't really think all that much in it. Then it had some more problems, and some more, and the car was swiftly handed back, because you don't buy a car from a main dealer and expect to have that many problems quite so soon. It also transpired that car later had a gearbox rebuild, so had he kept a hold of it, that wouldn't have been the end of his problems. In spite of all that, I still had masses of admiration for the FF, and when I found myself in the position of being able to buy something new, that was the car that I wanted. But during my search, a number of people I know in the Ferrari world told me to exercise some caution, citing the fact that the FF included many technological advancements for the firm, and early cars in particular were somewhat finicky. I was more or less told that if I were to buy an FF, I should probably get used to the idea of a warning light being illuminated, often really for no actual problem, maybe a sensor that was just a little bit too harsh. However, this was a concern. One that turned out not to be unfounded, as when I had that car inspected, it revealed a lot of issues, from garden variety and not really fault stuff like warm brake discs and the like, to other slightly more troubling things, a large number of error messages, different issues with the car, both mechanical and electrical. Overall, the cost to fix that car and put it right would have been many thousands of pounds, possibly up to about 20 or 25 grand. And that was assuming that during the inspection we had already found everything that was actually wrong with it. I promptly ran away in terror like a little girl and eventually wound up buying an F12. a very close relative of this car, but one that seems to be generally just a little bit easier to live with. Though there are, I'm sure, plenty of FFs out there which have given their owners little to no trouble, I don't think that's the norm. In fact, even this fairly late 2015 example required a rebuild of the PTU. That's the power transfer unit up the front, which forms Ferrari's very clever second gearbox. In short, these cars are all-wheel drive, but not in the way that more or less any other manufacturer would do it. Because Ferrari insisted on making sure the engine was just as low to the ground as in everything else, they refused to have any sort of drive shaft going below it. So instead, because this is how Italian brains work, they built a whole second gearbox attached to the front of that lovely V12, which has two of its own gears, not quite matching any gears in the regular gearbox, and then a set of clutches which work on a near constant slip to provide you with a very basic form of all-wheel drive up to a certain speed, or I think about 5th gear, after which point it just becomes regular old two-wheel drive. When it works, it's actually a marvellous system, does give you a little more confidence in the wet, is relatively unintrusive, and I think a genius solution. However, they're problematic. Over the years, Ferrari brought out a number of different revisions for it. Even so, this very late example still required a rebuild. But this is one of the good bits of news for anyone considering an FF, because, as it turns out, there are some solutions. I must actually give some credit to Ferrari here, because when you talk about something like a broken gearbox, what you'll often conjure up in your head is an image of a big metal box full of lots of little shards that's really no good to man or beast. However, more often than not, what's actually happened is a seal has failed, so the system no longer produces the hydraulic pressure required to operate correctly. In the early days, very often the solution was simple replacement, if for no other reason than this was usually the most expedient way to get the customer back on the road. However, over the years, Ferrari themselves have produced a number of kits to be able to rectify some of the problems, and there are now firms out there who can actually rebuild the box too. So, when Nick got this car, it was already known that the box had failed. It was agreed between him and the dealer it would go off to SS Autotech, who do a rebuild on them that's actually fairly comprehensive. It involves much more than simply taking it apart and refitting new seals. They also put new forks and various different bits in there. If you want details on it, ask them. It's not exactly a cheap service, at about £9,000 or £10,000, I think. However, that is a lot cheaper than the cost of a brand new unit. Nick is a very lucky chap because this car sits alongside a 458 Italia, which I've actually just driven. They are really a perfect pair of cars. The 458 for having a little bit of fun at the weekends, and this for the whole rest of the time. But as you'll see if you watch the pair of videos, you'll find out the truth is a little bit more complicated and I think interesting. The 458, you see, I don't really think it's actually that dynamic and exciting when it really comes down to it. But the FF, well, that's a different story. Even at the factory gates, these do sound good, but not that good. This one has been fitted with a Novitec X-pipe in the centre and Novitec back boxes at the rear. Those are valved and controlled by a little switch hidden under here. Some people say their car sounds just as good as an F1 car. This doesn't. This is much, much better than any modern day F1 car. This sounds like one of the proper old school screamers of the 1990s. It's fabulous. As, to be honest, is the rest of the car. Here's the wild and crazy thing. You'd expect the 458 of the pair to be the more interactive and engaging one. It's not. It's this. The steering in here is better. It's better weighted, more feelsome. You trust the car. Okay, it doesn't have the poise and delicacy of the 458 because it is considerably heavier, but it's also got quite a bit more punch. This is up in both power and torque. Sure, power or torque to weight, it's still down, but this is not exactly a slow car. Like the Lusso, you do have to work the gearbox because if you put it in the gear you think you should be in, it's not really going to deliver the performance that you expect. If you want this thing to really move, you don't just use third, fourth and fifth, you've got to have first and second going as well. And when you do, it's incredible. It will put the power down, no trouble whatsoever. Today it's nice and dry, but even when it isn't, this is a car that you've got no worry about having fun in. It lacks the spicier race setting on the Manettino. Instead, it has an extra one called Comfort, and then below wet, a special ice mode too, for those situations where traction is really, really limited. In all fairness, I think very few people that own one of these would take the car out in conditions where that's actually required, but I think it's nice to know that it's there. Like in the 458, the gearbox here doesn't quite have the bite or punch of the later F12 or the Lusso, but in a car like this, it's actually not that much of a problem. Other highlights, the seats, they're brilliant, lovely, comfortable but supportive, plenty of adjustment. All of the leather in here is wonderful. This later car also has a panoramic roof, which you don't tend to see in the earlier ones. It's also got double glazing, which I believe is standard fit in these. In fact, all of the glazing is also thermically insulated for keeping thermics out. And this later model even fixes an issue of the earlier ones by having a slightly less rubbish sat-nav that features Apple CarPlay. Your fancy steering wheel is all very much the same as in every other Ferrari of the time. I like the HVAC controls down here. They're nice, easy to use, and more importantly, easy to read, unlike those in the later Lusso, which was quite frustrating. This is also a very high specification car. The FF wears more subtle shades quite well, like this Grigio Silverstone. That's the same shade as my old Scuderia. The black leather in here is livened up by a bit of contrast stitching, which, to be honest, I think it needs. And these really are usable cars for adults. I have a slightly long torso, so though I'm only about 5'10", I'm probably a little more like 6 foot in terms of torso height, but I can go in the back of one of these, no problem. If you're all 6'4", maybe you'll struggle, but generally speaking, it's fine. The little weird two-step boot in the back actually has a lot more room than you think, and you can drop the seats too, so actually, you can get quite a bit in here. Even in sport mode, the damping is pretty good, though it is surprisingly firmer than the 458. Only just, but noticeable. It is certainly a big car, a little bit more daunting. Happily, this also has parking sensors and the like, so if you are experienced, it's not impossible to place. One of the few options this car does not have is the lift, but many FF owners have told me that they've got cars without it and they've never really had an issue. These ride fairly well, and even if you take it mildly off-roading, by which I mean across a field, it'll be fine. So then, in short, to drive, the car's all brilliant, but they do have a tendency to break. Is that it then? Well, no, because there is another angle to this. They're a lot more expensive now. I previously said that under £100,000, best thing you can buy. But to get one now under £100,000 is not impossible, but to get one from a reputable dealer with a proper warranty on it is going to be very challenging at that money. The only exception, I think, would be a car with an awful lot of miles on it. That actually in of itself would not put me off, because these are cars designed to do big mileage. In Europe in particular, I'm told, they really love the four-seater Ferraris. They're a mainstay of that customer base. But here, we've never been quite so attached to them. Chiefly, I think, because of the massive depreciation they suffer, though it's always hard to tell whether they depreciate like a stone because nobody buys them, or nobody buys them because they depreciate like a stone. Bit of a chicken and egg thing. But, need I remind you, that's a pretty compelling argument. I think you will agree. And what are you going to pay for one of these now? Well, it's hard to say, and to be honest, I'm sort of loath to actually quote a number, but let's call it £125,000 or £135,000. Not so long ago, the sort of 140 to 150 grand mark, you look like you can nearly get a Lusso, but prices have gone up. Half of that is the market just doing its thing. It's all over the place at the moment. But there is another side to it that's particularly pertinent for the FF and the Lusso. They're gone now. The line has been ended, replaced instead by the Purosangue, which I'm sure is a wonderful, lovely thing if you happen to want a 4x4 with a prancing horse on it and you've got a spare £500,000, which I think is what they're going to cost once you've chucked the usual options at them. Fact is, I'm pretty sure there's plenty of people out there for whom, even if they've got the money, it's just not the sort of car that would appeal. Likewise, I bet there's plenty of people out there who would never ever have a Ferrari up until the point they made the Purosangue. But there are certainly enough in both camps, I think, to make this still a very relevant purchase. And what do we actually have here? Well, I think it's a very beautiful, criminally underrated, gorgeous to drive, amazing to listen to, even in standard guy's car, with more than enough power to excite, that's actually practical, so if you do have a family, you can take them away. If they've outgrown the 911, you can still get your teenagers in the back of this, no trouble whatsoever. And you're probably going to be a slightly cooler parent for having a Ferrari over a Porsche. A top-end Panamera is still going to cost you the thick end of 200,000 quid. And the way the Porsche market is, the 130 grand that it's going to take you to get into a decent one of these with a proper factory-backed warranty is just not going to get you a car anywhere near as exciting. The Panamera is a lovely thing, full of toys and tech and wonder and all that, and very, very quick, but just doesn't excite. It doesn't deliver the pseudo sports car thrills that this certainly can. And in actual fact can show up many a genuine sports car. Though like most Ferraris, the mileage isn't exactly stratospheric, this still has 22,000 of them on the clock, so it's not unused either. Even better, in the time that he's had it, this car hasn't given Nick a single mechanical problem whatsoever. He is absolutely smitten with it, as, to be honest, am I. Companies like SS Autotech also, I think, really do make the difference between whether this is a car that I can recommend or not. For the kind of person buying this, an £8,000 or £9,000 bill is one that, okay, is really, really going to hurt, but worst case scenario, you could afford. However, 25 grand, that's just too much. So the difference they make by being able to repair the PTU is a big one. They'll warranty it too, by the way. Sure, it's still a car full of Ferrari quirks. If you don't order the passenger display, you get a rather comical, well, pen drawer, I suppose you can call it. You do need to find one, I think, with the panoramic roof if you have people in the back often, and with an FF, that's trickier than a Lusso. It's also a little bit odd in the way that it works. It will take you some time to get used to all of this. Things like the window switches and that occasionally will play up, and of course, it will just be expensive to run. Even when it's not broken, it's not going to be a cheap car. With luck, if you compare it with, say, an RS6, it may go some way to offsetting the extra cost of running by the fact it shouldn't depreciate anywhere near as much. And so, for that reason, though perhaps by a narrower margin than I would like, the FF retains my recommendation, but with a rather big asterisk next to it. Please buy it from somewhere reputable, get an inspection, and get a proper warranty on it. Please. Then, get your FF and enjoy what I think is easily one of the best Ferraris ever made. So then, a huge thank you to Nick for bringing his car out. As ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and even if you have, make sure to check the bell icon so you'll be notified of every new video release. And whatever it is, I hope to see you there. Bye-bye.